All right, Josh Smith here, live in my Flat Five studios again. Today's guest is an incredible guitar player, an incredible educator, a big influence on me, not just musically, but personally, because he's always been so kind every time I met him and so willing to share and little bits of advice or anecdotes and stories. I don't know him as well as I wish I did. I wish we got more time to hang, and he just moved away from LA and back to New York, which bums me out. But everybody's got to do what they got to do. You may have heard him on Nora Jones records, Tracy Chapman records. Hopefully you have his own albums because they're great. He also has incredible educational material, new books, guitar tips, website, and information. He's just such a great guy and talented player, one of my favorites. Everybody, please welcome Adam Levy.
Oh man, Josh, thank you so much.
You're welcome, man. Well, it's true. I wish we got more time to hang and talk, because every time I feel like I do get to be around you, I'm not just learning something. I'm always kind of inspired by the personal side of it. I feel like, I don't know. You can get along with everybody, and I struggle with that sometimes. You know what I
Oh,
mean? It's inspiring.
oh, right on.
Yeah, man. So
Yeah, I was
ask,
stoked when we got to play the last Gitaco that we did, and then I got to sit next to you and really just like have a front row seat and get to chat with you, and that was really great. I'm so grateful for that.
yeah, likewise. It was so nice to sit right next to you, and just hear you do your thing sitting right next to you and just kind of be there. That was a fun night. Kudos to Mason and Gabriel for doing that. That was
Yeah.
really, yeah. Dude, so I've been starting all these by asking everybody kind of how the guitar ends up in their hands. My was just like a random coincidence. Nobody plays in my family, not a lot of musicians or musical background in my family. My dad just happened to buy me a guitar on the way home from work and bring it home. And I guess he wanted a musician in the family. How
Oh
did it work
wow.
for you? What was your family's musical background?
Um, my parents weren't really musical, but there is a family connection. I will say my stepdad actually loved music. I say loved, still loves music. He's alive and well, still loves music. But I'm thinking as a kid, so he listened to a lot of jazz. In particular, he liked the Crusaders. So besides my own musical stuff I was into, which was probably like the Beatles and Chuck Berry at the beginning, there was a lot of, I heard a lot of Larry Carlton, coming on these Crusaders records. And it was inspiring because my stepdad liked to listen to music loud. So I never had the idea that jazz was supposed to be like background music or something. It's like you're supposed to feel it. So that was going on in the house, even though neither my stepdad nor my mom was playing music. But my mom's father, my grandfather, was a professional arranger and musical director. He worked in television in the variety show era. So he would always have a live band to write for and singers to write arrangements for. And that was what he did for years and years. And he was still active when I was a kid. So even before I played the guitar, I used to go sometimes to sessions with him and see musicians. He would always have, top-notch players working for him, and it looked like a cool thing. And so somewhere in my brain there was like, well, there's the records that I love, which again was like the Beatles, and I really liked Chuck Berry even before I was playing guitar. And then I got to go inside the world of what that looked like a music studio, and see how things happened. And so before that, I had played some piano, because my grandfather was a piano player. So there was always pianos around. When he bought a new piano, he gave us his old piano.
Okay.
But I never really had a knack for the piano. And then one day I was at summer camp when I was probably 12, and somebody had a guitar. It was the first time I put my hands on a guitar. And somebody showed me a G chord, and I could play it I got so I didn't want to let go. Like once I had that chord in my hand, I was just like didn't want to let it go. And then I went home that day and I told my mom how excited I was about it, and she says, "Oh, I used to play the guitar." And I had no idea.
Wow.
I had no idea. So she went and found in a closet or the garage, I don't even remember, but she dug up her old guitar that she had taken some classes on, and she tuned it up and showed me whatever she could remember, and there was a couple of songbooks in there, and that's how I started. And before long, I got so serious that my bar mitzvah was coming up, and my father, not my stepdad who I mentioned with the Crusaders records, but my father said, "Well, if you want to get a guitar, tell me what you want, and I'll get it for you." And the 12-year-old me wanted an ES 335, which is, I remember I can still see there's pictures of me when I got it, and I could kind of barely. I wasn't a tall kid. I'm not a tall grown up, so it was a pretty big guitar for me, but maybe because of Larry Carlton or something that seemed like the right guitar for me. And I still have that guitar. I play it all the time.
Yeah. Wow. Also, just an aside, as fellow Jewish guys, I wonder how many of us got guitars for our bar mitzvahs, because I certainly did.
Oh,
yeah.
What did you get?
I got an acoustic guitar for my bar mitzvah. I needed a new acoustic guitar at the time because I started playing when I was 6. So I'd been playing quite a while by the time my bar mitzvah came along, and I had gotten from small guitar, small acoustic, to small electric, then to big electric, and then I needed a full-size acoustic guitar, like a good one, and I got a Takamine acoustic guitar.
Oh yeah. Wow, you still have it?
I do still have it. Yeah.
Awesome.
I wanted a black one because at that time Takamine was in all the ads, because they were the first ones that had the preamp with all the graphic sliders and everything. I thought it was the coolest thing. And Bruce Springsteen had a black Takamine. I was like, I'm going to get like that one, Wow. That was my bar mitzvah gift. That and then I took all my bar mitzvah money and finally bought myself the Sony stereo with the glass door and the 2 big speakers. That was the only thing I cared about.
Yeah. And your parents probably didn't see you again for like 5 years.
Pretty much. Although 13 is also right about when I started gigging. So it was like the stereo was really important because I never left my room after that. I had my guitar, edge of my bed. The stereo was literally touching my bed. And I just sat there playing all the time. But it's weird. It feels like a lifetime between like little kid, bar mitzvah, and gig, but it was like just months really between my first real gigs and bar mitzvah.
That's incredible. I knew you started young. I didn't know you were working that young. That's really incredible.
Yeah, actually, I hadn't really thought about how close it was to my bar mitzvah in time until right now, which is because like I actually just digitized my bar mitzvah video, which was, talk about a freaking trip looking back at that. And it looks like I'm a baby. Like I can't imagine gigging, but that's right at the same time. Yeah.
I'm picturing you at your bar mitzvah reading your Torah portion and then looking at your watch and going, "Hey, sorry, Rabbi, I gotta go. I gotta hit at 8:00, man. Well, I gotta load in. I gotta load in."
Did you play guitar at your bar mitzvah?
So I mean, I got the 335 and I plugged it in and played it a little bit, but not in any kind of like, I didn't put on a show. I just was like.
So like I told the cantor, I don't need any backing. I'll do all the musical accompaniment for myself during the bar mitzvah. So I was so bold. Like I remember saying, you don't have to play piano. I'll just do it myself, and they gave me the book and I backed myself up.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah. Wow. I totally forgot about that. I'm only remembering it because I literally just digitized that video. I just set up a way to go through all my old videos and put them into the computer.
Oh man.
So okay, so you're in California at this time, right? You're in Encino. Right. You're a Valley guy. And when do you start going to Dick Grove? Because I'm fascinated by that scene.
Yeah. Man, that's a funny story. So by that time, we had left the valley. I went to high school in Thousand Oaks,
Oh, okay.
and there's a couple of really good guitar players there. One was a guy, I don't know if you'd know him, but his name is Basil Fung. And he was like, as far as I know, the only like really serious guitar player in my generation in Thousand Oaks. You know, he was a year older than me. And he went to MI, you know, like in the early 80s. And I thought, well, I should go to MI. So graduation was coming up. You know, I was 17, and I applied because I figured it was either that or maybe Berkeley, and I hadn't actually really known that much about Grove. Although my grandfather, who I mentioned, had taught some classes there. He had taught some vocal arranging classes. So I auditioned for MI, and I went down to Hollywood, and I had already been there a few times to sit in on some classes with my friend Basil, and it seemed pretty cool. Although I was intimidated. You know, I didn't have the cojones that you had as a young teenager. I still don't, but I'm working on it. But back then I was like, man, am I going to be able to hang like with and then, so I was a little nervous, but excited because that seemed to be the center of guitar learning, at least in California, in LA. And then I got accepted, and with a few weeks coming up before school started, my grandfather said, hey, you know, if you're not sure about MI, maybe check out Dick Grove. Like, I'll go over there with you. I'll introduce you to Dick. You can sit in on some classes. And I totally dug the vibe there. It was much smaller, much more personal. It's funny. I mean, I didn't know Nels Cline when I was growing up, but you know, we both grew up in LA. He's a few years older than me, so I didn't know him, but we talked recently, and he told me some Dick Grove stories. He didn't go there, but he used to go to some of the open workshops they'd have there. Okay. But anyway, so I applied at Dick Grove, and I got in, and I withdrew. I never went to MI, but I withdrew my application, and I started Dick Grove, and it was amazing. I mean, I totally got my ass kicked. I was 17, and almost everybody there was, you know, in their 20s or 30s. So just socially to be like in classes with people who, you know, were grown up, and also people who have been playing real gigs and had gone to college. Some of them already had music degrees, but they wanted to go deeper into this stuff. And I loved how immersive it was. Just like the Dick Grove music culture, Dick had a whole way of thinking about harmony and a whole way of thinking about composition and arranging. And so it wasn't just information. Everything was connected. You know, every class that you took kind of bounced off of other classes that you took that fit into this whole kind of universe of the way that Dick thought about music. So I went there for a year, and then I took a little break, and then I went back through a whole other year and studied composition and arranging, and barely touched my guitar for a year, but was in music every day. And in a lot of ways, it was like the most growth I've ever had in 1 year as a player, when I wasn't on the guitar, but just thinking about music in a different way, you know?
Man, you said something that I hadn't thought about, but is interesting to me. What's the word I'm looking for? Like the attendance at Dick Grove or MI or a place like the actual student, you know, body it's not like going to USC or some regular college. You end up with a lot of guys who are older, who maybe already finished college.
Yep.
And yeah, that must be interesting to all of a sudden be sitting, you know, when you go to college, all of a sudden you're sitting in a room with people who are really into what you're into, but they're all your age, you know?
Right. That's right.
Yeah, it is a different vibe, I would imagine, going to MI or a place like that.
Yeah. You go to Dick Grove, and like, you know, there's people there that have already lived a bunch of life, you know, musically and otherwise. And so they have a different perspective. Yeah. If you go to USC or something like that, yeah, students are mostly within a range, but yeah, at Dick Grove or MI or a place like that, people could be at all different points in their life, and I think that was really great for me, you know, musically and just in personal growth, you know.
Yeah. Wow. Well, during that period, are you gigging too, like alongside of school?
I was, yeah. I played in a big band that did a lot of like, you know, weddings and parties and stuff. And so, some of my first real gigs were playing in this community big band based in Thousand Oaks. It was the Dave Pierce Stardust Orchestra, you know. And I bought a tuxedo, and I played, you know, my bar mitzvah guitar and my little Princeton amp, and that was my rig. And so I was doing that throughout high school, and then at Dick Grove, and the big band gigs continued. But I met some people at Grove. There was a guy who wanted to put together like a show band, like 5 horns, 4-piece rhythm section, 2 singers up front, and he was writing all these charts. He had gone through the arranging program, so he really knew how to write these kind of big showy arrangements. And so we started playing gigs around LA. We used to play at this place, Carlos and Charlie's. Do you remember that place?
I've heard stories about it, but I never went. It was my time. Yeah.
And we played some private events and, you know, some corporates and stuff. And it was pretty hard to sustain an 11-piece band. You know, I look back and I think like, wow, that's really ambitious, you know, to get a band like that up and working. But so, yeah, those were my earliest gigs at that time. Yeah, around the Dick Grove time.
It's amazing how generationally, like, I mean, we're not that far apart, but you're maybe, you know, half a generation before me, but especially like maybe a generation before you, you know, another 10 years or something. How many guys I've talked to in that age range who played in show bands, like, and it was full time, you know, they would go city to city and play 5 nights somewhere and then go somewhere else. And yeah, you're playing Chicago and Blood, Sweat and Tears and, you know, Motown and Stax and I mean, you know, by the time I came up, there were plenty of gigs, but there wasn't that. Like, I didn't have that opportunity, you know, to be whatever, wearing a tux, playing more complicated music, or maybe reading charts. I don't know. Yeah, I think that's a lot of on the job training, like a ton.
Man, yeah. So yeah, I was a little late for the show band thing, but you know, I was aware of it and caught the tail end of it. But when I came up, there still was plenty of on-the-job training. You know, I didn't know anything really about small clubs. That's an interesting thing. Like, I didn't play any small club gigs in this period. Like, most of the things that I was doing, the big band, those were all kind of big events and things. And then the show band, I mean, I guess you could say Carlos and Charlie's is a small club, but like I wasn't playing. I used to go to the Baked Potato. I'd see shows there, but I never played there when I, you know, in that time frame that I'm talking about.
Right.
And as far as like playing in a blues bar or, you know, playing any kind of like small intimate club like that, I never did any of that until later. There were all these kind of big showy things that I was doing. But yeah, plenty of on the job training, reading. I feel, you know, in retrospect, I feel really lucky like that I got to do that, you know. And then when I left LA, I moved to San Francisco when I was 23. So that's like 89. Mm-hmm. And same kind of thing. Like, I just started, you know, when you're in LA, I found I actually had gotten, it was hard for, I was kind of lazy about hustling in my own hometown.
Yeah, interesting.
And when I got to San Francisco and I didn't know anybody, I had to start hustling immediately because otherwise nothing was going to happen. I guess in LA, I just figured, well, if I just keep playing gigs and play good and show up on time and whatever, like, the word will get out. In San Francisco, I didn't have that. I was just like, I was unknown. So I started going out to a lot of jam sessions. I started like talking to people and really trying to connect. And so that was like the next phase where I really had to figure that stuff out.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously, probably your grandfather was supportive, but I mean, he was making his living, yes, musically, but, as an arranger and all that type of stuff, not a performer, which it seemed like maybe you were, it was obvious that was going to be your lane for the most part. So what did
Yeah.
they think? They know how difficult that is. What did your parents and your grandfather think about, when you start, make things like moving to San Francisco and stuff,
Yeah. They were always super supportive,
Yeah.
which I really appreciate. I don't have kids, so I don't know what that's like when your kids want to do something that
Yeah.
might be a hard road, So I can't imagine. But my grandparents were super supportive. My folks were supportive. My grandfather was very practical. Like to him, show business was business. He over the years, encouraged me to think of it more that way. And I over the years, sometimes was just thinking more about creating stuff and experiencing stuff. And I've told this story before, but this always cracks me up when I think of it. Like one of the you mentioned in the intro that I played with Tracy Chapman,
Mhm.
and that was the first really big gig I had. I was living in San Francisco, but I was at that point. I was like 30 almost at that point, and I'd been playing a lot of little gigs around San Francisco. The only other like name person that I had played with before that was a guy named Dan Hicks, who I don't know if you would know, but
Sure. Yeah, I'm familiar. Yeah.
so I toured with him for a little bit. And so the Tracy Chapman gig in the mid 90s was a real blue chip kind of gig to have. And I did it for about a year and I got really burned out on it. Tracy was like between records and she just wanted to rehearse. We rehearsed. I was on retainer for almost a whole year, rehearsing 5 days a week. With no real end in sight. It was like, well, we'll make the record when we're ready to make the record. Okay, cool. And just weeks turned into months and months turned into half a year. And so by the time we made that record, which is called New Beginning, which has Give Me One Reason and other songs on it that I played on that whole record, I was just kind of fried. And so I shortly after the record was done, before the record actually came out, I left that gig. And one of the reasons I left that gig was that I felt like I don't know, the Tracy who was singing these songs about making the world a better place. When you rehearse with somebody 5 days a week, it feels more like a grind, even if
Sure.
no matter who you're working for. So I felt like there's kind of a bit of a disconnect because I'm just on the business end of this gig. I'm not out saving the world or doing anything. And so I tried to explain to my grandfather when I left that gig, like, I just felt like, Tracy's singing these songs but I'm not feeling those vibes, in the job and it just felt kind of disconnected to me. And he just looked at me and he's like, well, you don't think Tony Bennett actually left his heart in San Francisco, do you? He's like, it's just show business. He's like, do you have another gig to go to? I said, not really. I mean, I have lots of little gigs around town, but to him, like, why you would leave one blue chip gig unless somebody else offered you more money or whatever,
Right.
or more security or what. To him, it was always a job. He was never not working. So he was supportive of me, but I do think he sometimes wondered about my my way, because I definitely, I don't know, like did somebody teach you the business end of the business?
No, no. I mean, my parents were super supportive, because I even as a kid, I'm a pretty serious guy, which I can kind of tell you are as well. There's not a lot of extraneous extracurricular activity from me,
Yeah.
or like I just do my job. I love it. I just
Yeah.
want to make music. And I was like that when I was 10. It was pretty obvious to them, okay, he can't be told what to do.
Right.
He's already figured it out. My grandparents were not thrilled. They wanted me to go to college and be a doctor or a lawyer or something like that,
Sure.
and without sounding too ridiculously egotistical, I had good grades. I was a smart kid with good tests. They so that I know why they were disappointed,
Mm.
and because it's a hard life as a musician, especially what I wanted to do. I wasn't like your grandfather. I didn't go into it thinking I'm going to be a record producer or an
Yeah.
arranger or something. I just want to be a guitar player. So they
Right.
knew that was really difficult.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, nobody told me how hard it was going to be, or especially like the choices you have to make, like you just said, where you're following your heart, because that's so much of what we do, and I still
Right.
deal with that now. I get called
Yeah.
for gigs as sideman things that 20 years ago I would have done, and even 10 years ago I would have done, and now I won't do, because I'm so much invested in my thing again that it's just not worth it to me. Even though it may
Yeah.
be really worth it to me, it's not worth it to
Right.
me.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. It is a difference though between like when you realize you're that kind of guy, and it's not just about, although I have to be a responsible adult and take care of my family and all that, but it's
Sure.
not just about a profession. It isn't. It's not just
Right.
about that. Yeah.
Right. Right.
Isn't that like, for me, that's the hardest part of this pandemic, is like the 95% of like the shit that I identify as has just been
Hmm.
taken away. So
Right.
now I am just focusing on shit. I better make some money somehow. What do I
Yeah.
do? It's weird.
Right.
Right.
Right. I just thought of this. I mean, it's just funny. I remember like a year and a half ago that AB5 thing that bill passed.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, absolutely.
And all my musician friends, that's all we were talking about. Like, this is just going to decimate
Yeah.
the gig economy. And of course, we couldn't see what was really going to decimate the gig economy. But yeah, people aren't talking about AB5 so much at the moment.
Not so
Not a
much.
hot topic.
Not so much. At this point, I would get on a plane and fly 15 hours to play with the worst rhythm section on the face of the earth,
Yeah.
and I'd play the same song for in 6 hours. You know what I mean? Just to make me, because I can count on one hand the amount of times I've played with another musician in the past year.
Yeah.
And it's staggering, like that's literally, you and I are improvisational people. That's what we do. And you
That's what
can't
we do.
improv in a vacuum by yourself. I'm sorry. It's just not fun.
It's not fun. I mean, yes, I have a looper pedal. Yes, I am a creative person. I can do stuff. I mean, I've been working on my solo guitar thing, but it's not. No, it's not fun. I can't even say it any better than that. It's not fun. When I first moved here to New York last year in September, I was living pretty close to Prospect Park. And the numbers in New York, the COVID numbers, were fairly, coming down, and the weather was nice. So a few times I called friends who lived near the park and say, hey man, do you want to meet me over on this corner? And we'll wear masks and we'll bring acoustic guitars and we'll just sit on the bench and play tunes. Mm-hmm. And that was amazing because I hadn't done that in LA at all. I mean, I don't think I played a gig with people since probably Easter.
Yeah.
And so just to sit on a sunny day in the park and play, tunes with a friend was so nice. And so I did that a handful of times until the weather just got too cold.
Yeah.
And also we moved again. We were living near the park, then we moved. So where we are now, I don't know anybody who's within walking distance. And until this past week or so, you wouldn't want to play guitar outside, when it's in the 20s. Like your hands are just like not built for that. But it's starting to come back. Somebody just asked me today if I was available to do a gig in April, and I said I didn't ask it. I didn't ask what it paid or anything like that. To be it's with somebody who I love and am happy to play with. It wasn't like somebody DM'd me on Instagram that I don't know and like, hey, do you want to play? Like, this is somebody that I would jump to play a gig with anytime, but particularly now, I'm so stoked.
Yeah.
So yeah,
it's really crazy. I mean, it's been, my last gig was the last week of February last year, so it's been a year now, and since then I've had actually a bunch of like record projects. So I've been in the studio a number of times with musicians for a couple of days at a time, which is different. Like you're still playing music, but it's not the same. And I've done 2 gigs here at my studio, like streaming with the guys, that felt like completely alien, like playing to no audience, but there is an audience. It's just on the computer, and we hadn't played, and it felt totally alien. Yeah, I miss it so much.
But like, do you teach one-on-one? Do you have students that you teach one-on-one?
I teach, not really. I do it during this pandemic. I've done it twice for a week at a time, because I'm sure it was the same for you. Once the pandemic started, I started just getting inundated with people asking me for lessons, like just tons and tons. So finally I was like, all right, I'm going to take like a week every 4 months or something and do it 4 times a year. And I'll just kill myself for that week. I'll do all day long, every day. Yeah. So I did. I've done it twice. I did 50 plus lessons in a week, 2 times. So I did, like 100 something lessons. But it was all, everyone was a different person. So it was just one lesson, with somebody. And it was enjoyable. It was hard. It was, a lot of hard work. But no, I don't do any like ongoing ones.
Okay. I'm curious, like, if you had a student who asked you, like, hey, I'm stuck at home, it's the pandemic, but I want to work on what it's going to be like to play with people. I want to work on the real thing. Like, how do you what would you tell a student?
Geez, that's really difficult. To me, that the only way to work on what it would be like is play with records. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like play along with live albums or something like that. Like, yeah, that's a really difficult one. And actually, that brings me, I was curious, and I'm going to ask you, since you do teach so much, do you think the biggest difference, because obviously now guys are so far more advanced quicker because of the amount of information available to them. Right. So they're able to immediately have, be curious about something, find out about it, and start applying it. Right. But the on-the-job part, like we said, is non-existent, especially now. But even before the pandemic, I was as a 13-year-old playing sometimes 4 times a week, sometimes 5, and you're talking about 3 sets where I'm soloing all night, and I'm forced to like develop a vocabulary and learn what it means to be a professional, like playing tune, playing time, get my gear together. I'd get dirty looks from the old dudes I'm playing with. I'd fix that, and then the next week I'd be better. They don't have that. Do you think that's the biggest difference generationally?
In my experience, yes, I would say that. Like when I moved up to San Francisco, I mentioned that period, right, in '89. I didn't know anybody. One of the first opportunities I had to play, there was a band that used to play in Pacifica, which is a little ways down from San Francisco. And they played 6 nights a week, same band. They just left their gear there. It was like a supper club. No, not a supper club. It was a restaurant on the beach with a dance floor, and people could dance. And this band played 6 nights a week, probably 4 sets. and they said, look, we can't hire you because we're already we already worked out the gig here, and we don't need a guitar player, but you're new in town. If you want to come down and play anytime, you are totally welcome. And they were all people in their 40s, and I was like 23. And they, that gig, even though it wasn't a paid gig for me, I went down there a lot, and I had to learn tunes. I had to learn, like you said, to all the stuff you said, to be a professional musician and get my sound together, and dress good, and just everything, and that was an incredible opportunity. I wasn't making any money doing it, but I didn't care. I did it until I started getting too busy, with actual paid gigs, and I couldn't do it anymore. But those kind of on the job things. I remember. Do you know who Jake Reed is? He's a drummer in LA.
Yeah, I know Jake.
Yeah, he was telling me that he had studied with Peter Erskine,
Sure.
and when Jake was a student, sometimes Peter would take him to sessions, and Jake told me this story that Peter was playing, it was like a big band recording session, and the chart didn't have really all the figures in it that as a drummer you would want.
Right.
And by the second take, Peter had figured the chart out, and by the third take, they were done. Next chart. And Jake asked Peter, he's like, man, how did you figure that out? Like, what are you doing? And Peter Erskine apparently told Jake, pay attention. You have to pay attention. And that kind of thing, where you would have an apprentice, where your teacher would take you to a session or take you to a gig, or just have older cats that would let you sit in, anytime, and get to play a lot. Of course, being a nostalgic person, I'm inclined to say that's better than learning stuff on YouTube. I might be wrong. But there's no doubt that it's different. Like you can't say that it's the same. Whether one is better than the other, only time will tell. 100 years from now, they'll figure it out. Oh, you know what? Actually, YouTube was better than playing with a bunch of old guys. I could be wrong, but you can't say that they're the same. They're completely different.
Completely different. And the motivation of just getting the knowing nod of approval from a 40-year-old musician as a 13-year-old was my drug. Like, yeah. I was driven by wanting to be one of the guys, that I didn't want ever for them to be like, yeah, kid, that was all right, or you sound good for a kid. Yeah. I hated that more than anything, especially back then. I had people starting to come to see me and interest because I was a kid, and that was a thing, and all that was, but I was only concerned with what did the other musicians think about what I was doing, and did I belong, and yeah, I do think that obviously everybody's different, and you can't bemoan it because they don't have that opportunity now. But for me, it was the determining factor, I think, in me ending up where I'm at. Absolutely. 100%.
Wow. Yeah. Cool. Well, it's amazing you had the opportunities and that you had the confidence to show up and do it, because you really need both of those things. I mean, sometimes you get the opportunity, and when your moment comes, you just can't do it, Yeah. And other times, like, you're ready, but you don't have the opportunities, and you had that great combination of opportunity, and you believed in yourself, and you could deliver.
Yeah, it's weird looking back on it, because I didn't feel like cocky back then. I felt like motivated mostly. It was just like, well, that's what I want to do. I'm going to do it. And it's funny, like, it's always been this way for guitar players. We all know, every one of us started young and played young, and you think this is only your story. Like, you're the kid, wonderkind in town that plays with all these old guys. And that's not true. We, so many of us have that same story. But around that time, there was a group of guys all my age who started to do things. And it was like, that was part of it too. Like, I grew up knowing Derek Trucks pretty well, and we played together a lot because we're both in Florida. so I saw him. I saw Bonamassa, who now I know very well, and we work together a lot. I saw, guys like that start to have like careers and be treated as professionals. And it was motivating, like, well, if they can do it, why can't I do it? Yeah, yeah, for sure. All right, so you're in San Francisco, and you go through all the on-the-job training. You end up with Tracy Chapman. You leave the gig. How soon after that is the New York move?
Very soon. I left Tracy's gig. Within probably 3 months, I moved to New York.
Wow. And were you moving to New York because, the New York, I want to go play jazz thing, or was it because you just thought it would be a good place for you to work?
Both. Yeah.
Yeah. Nice.
A lot of the sorry?
No, because the New York thing is one I could never relate to. And it's fascinating to me, the rite of passage, in the jazz sense of moving to New York. Did you feel that? Like, who told you that, coming up, like, you got to go to New York? Like, it interests me.
Well, when I was right out of high school, actually, I went to New York for a week-long vacation. My cousin and I, for our high school graduate, we're the same age. So in '84, we got to go to New York for a week, and we stayed with some family. And, I got to go out and see some shows. I saw Carmen McRae, great jazz vocalist, at the Blue Note. And I saw, I forget, I want to say Ed Blackwell playing drums at the Vanguard. So I had this impression anyway of like, oh wow, that's that level. Even though there's a 12-year gap now between graduating high school and moving to New York, but so there was partly that seed was planted from that trip, actually being in those clubs and hearing the real thing happening, and for real. And then just, being a record person, when you're a kid, you just listen to records. And then at a certain point, you start reading the liner notes because you want to see who the players are. And then if you're paying attention and you put it together, you see, oh, well, these players are all in one place, and they tend to record with these producers at these studios. And this is a scene. And I started to notice that a lot of records that I liked were records that were in New York. So I was as much curious about the live scene as far as like playing live gigs, and also just recording, and even being a side person, and playing with songwriters, which is something that's always been part of the mix for me. It just seemed like that was the next level. There were great players in San Francisco for sure, but I got to a point where I just felt like I wanted to turn up the heat, and New York seemed to be the place to do that.
Do you think it went differently for you because you'd already moved from LA to San Francisco, and you weren't going straight to New York as a 23-year-old, you were going as a 30-year-old?
Man, I think about this sometimes. There are times when I wish I had just gone to New York straight away. Who knows if I would have survived or not? I really don't know. But, there was a lot of amazing stuff happening in New York in the late 80s and early 90s that I wish I had been, on the scene to be around. Just so many great players playing all the time, who by the time I got to New York, a lot of them just weren't playing on, they were still alive and well and making music, but they weren't just on the scene all the time, So I missed that. But I'll never know. Like I can't really change what I did. It did probably help me to kind of work up gradually to it. Like I told you, like when I was a kid in LA, I didn't have any hustle. When I moved to San Francisco, I had to figure it out. And then when I got to New York, it was kind of the same thing. I had maybe like 2 phone numbers of people that I had met or knew, and you know, a couple $100 and my bar mitzvah guitar, and that's all I had. So I needed to make stuff happen, you know, pretty quickly. And I wasn't going to get discovered in my studio apartment practicing. I had to get out. So that it was good for me. Also, by then I had obviously it's nice to show up in a new town with a calling card, because by the time I got to New York, you know, shortly after that, Tracy's record came out and I'm on the radio. So it's nice if you're in a new town and you can say, hey, that's me on the radio right now. Right. But I also had a little more sense of myself, and I knew I wasn't going to outplay anybody in New York. And maybe I think, you know, if I moved there when I was younger, I might have tried in vain to get to a certain thing technically. But when I moved to New York in my in my early 30s, I realized, like, okay, I have to find something that other people aren't doing. And it doesn't necessarily, well, I'm not going to be able to play faster than anyone. I'm not going to be able to play harder than anybody. But can I find a sound and an approach that's me and that's honest? And early on, a lot of the gigs I was doing in New York were 2 guitar gigs. And that even makes it more that way, because now you've got to follow somebody else who's just played a great guitar solo. So what can you do that's not that's compelling, you know? So maybe the timing was perfect. I don't know.
Interesting. Man, it's always interesting to me when guys move to a new city without a gig that's bringing them there, and they just go. You know what I mean?
Right. My grandfather probably thought,
yeah, you're jumping out the window. I mean, you really are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How many cities have you lived in?
Only Florida, Fort Lauderdale, and here, LA.
Right.
That's
okay.
It. And it's like when I moved here, I had nothing. You know, I had done my thing, playing blues, put out records until I was 22. And I thought I was going to be giant blues star, you know, and when it didn't happen and I met my wife and wanted to be a grown up, you know, I was like, the only thing I could think to do was I should just try to make a living as a guitar player, forget this Josh Smith bullshit, and just go make a living. So my uncle lives here in LA. So I came out here just to try, like, to see what it was like. I stayed with him for a month. And I went out, he was graciously gave me a car to drive, and I went out every night, you know, and this is 2001. So I went out every night to, you know, there were still blues bars and jazz bars and places I could go, Baked Potato and, you know, Cafe Cordial and Lavalley and, you know, all the different places that I went, just trying to meet people and see if I thought it could work, you know, and network and get gigs. And I called my future, was about to be my wife. When I got back, we were going to get married. And I said, I think we should just go for it, you know? And, but it was, I had nothing I was coming to, no gigs, no prospects, just why not give it a shot? Yeah. I
mean, at that age, I think that's the perfect thing to do, you know, really, like take your shot. Like that's the perfect time to do that.
Crazy. Cause I was interviewing Reese Winans yesterday, piano, organ player who played with Steve Ray Vaughan and so many people. But he was recapping, and he didn't even realize a lot of it along the way, how everywhere he moved, he was brought there by a gig, and then it led to a lot of stuff. So it was like when he left Florida to go to San Francisco to play with Boz Scaggs, well, that brought him to San Francisco, and then that gave him all these other gigs that took him on the road or whatever, and he met somebody, you know, and then Jerry Jeff Walker stole him away and moved him to Austin, and then he's in Austin, he plays with him, and then Delbert, and then Stevie Ray, and something brings him to Nashville, and then he ends up there doing all those country records, you know, but it was like I didn't consciously go anywhere like without thinking about it. I got brought there to every place by a gig. Yeah.
I mean, that's smart. I think that's the way to do it. My grandfather probably thought I was crazy for moving to New York. He grew up in New York and moved to LA for a gig. in the late 40s, and was so conservative that he didn't even bring the whole family. He said, let me go out there for a year, see if this is even going to make any sense. And if it makes sense, then we'll come out. And it was to be the MD on a radio show, because it's the late 40s. There wasn't even like TV or anything. So he came out to do this radio gig. And, before that, he had been a songwriter in the Brill Building and, was just trying to write songs and stuff. But he could arrange, and his way of being in the world is like, if somebody said, hey, can you write for a string orchestra? He would just say yes. And then he'd go to the library and look up how to do it, and figure it out. So he moved his family to LA for a gig. And for him, I think it didn't totally make sense when I would move just following my heart, but I guess there's not a right or a wrong way to do it and all, but that's interesting about Reese, that work was the thing that moved him around.
Yeah. How quick did you feel the ball start to get rolling for you in New York?
Oh, not very quickly. It took a couple years. Actually, after my first year in New York, I moved briefly back to San Francisco because things weren't that happening, But then I realized, okay, am I going to do this or I'm not going to do this? So I moved back, and then things started to happen. But it's all, so many things have been, obviously I'm sure the same is for you, unplanned or unexpected. The reason I got the Tracy Chapman gig in the first place in San Francisco was through my friend Charlie Hunter. When he was on Blue Note and was, kind of in the big splash of his early career, his trio was doing some shows opening for Tracy Chapman. And she asked him if he knew a guitar player. She was looking for a guitar player, and he recommended me. It didn't come from me directly trying to get that gig. And same kind of thing when I moved to New York. Like, I met Nora Jones totally by happenstance, through an old friend, actually, through somebody I used to know in San Francisco who was in New York, and on and on. But it all of those opportunities really came in a slow burn kind of way. So yeah, my first year in New York was really rough. I moved back, and it took a while for things to really click. Around 2001 or 2 is where I started to really feel like something cool was happening. I was playing in good bands as a side person. It was very easy for me to book my own gigs in town when I wanted to, and now it feels like the most natural place. Even now, even in this pandemic time when there's no gigs and everything's busted, it's still, there's something about being here that feels like the right place. It's hard to explain, but that's how it is for me.
Yeah, that's great. When you met Nora, I'm curious, what's the first time like you really heard her play, and was it like, did you think, oh, she's good, or was it like, whoa?
It was gradual, actually. So, okay, the first time I met her, she wasn't playing. She and I were sitting next to each other at a bar to hear a friend's gig. We'd both gone to see this show. This friend introduced us because we were sitting next to each other, and he knew us both. He said, oh, excuse me. So we just exchanged numbers, and she called me for a gig a few weeks later where she wasn't playing piano, but she was singing. It was just like background music, playing standards. And so she brought this little GK amp and a SM58, and I brought my little amp, and she wasn't playing, but she could sing her ass. It was clear to me that she could sing her ass off, but I didn't know that she was a songwriter. And I knew that she played piano, but I didn't really know. And then, not too long after that, I must have heard her play and been knocked out, because I remember actually hiring her before her career took off. I used to play gigs with my little instrumental combo, and I'd have her on Wurlitzer, you know. So I really liked how she played. It's very clear. It's got space in it, but it's not spacey. Like it's really open, but at the same time, it's very clear where it's going, you know. And it sounds like her, you know, which is cool. So, but I still didn't. It's funny to me how long it took me to see where that gig was going, because we just played a lot of little funny gigs around town for a long time, you know, a year or two before things really clicked. And then I look back and some of my friends were like, "Oh yeah, I saw that coming a mile away." Like I knew that was going to be a big thing. I was like, "Really?" I was just happy because I liked her. I liked the music. I liked the other people that were around the scene. I had no idea that was gonna, that she was gonna take off. That gig was gonna be kind of my defining gig for 7 or 8 years of my life, and so I'm glad I didn't see it coming, because I probably would have choked or something, but it turned out pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, there's some incredible music there. You know, it's funny the way you talked about the way she played. That was what struck me. So I'm still a kid when her explosion happens, pretty much. And at first you hear the first song and it's like, well, that's cool, but it wasn't like what I was into at the time. But I could hear the quality and the talent, like, oh, that's great. But then I remember seeing her in, like, it must have been something on TV where it wasn't her, some sort of awards thing or one of those things as she blew up. And she was playing with maybe Bonnie Raitt or something. And she just playing piano while Bonnie sang. She's playing Whirly, actually. And I remember it was, her pocket was like, oh, that was because the first time I actually saw it and saw her play. And that was when I got it. Like, oh, no,
Right.
this is great. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, very cool, man. Wow. Well, so that's a big chunk of your life, like you said, and I'm sure when people talk to you, that's the first thing they ask you about is playing, solos on those songs and what it was like and all that time.
Yeah.
When it was going on and blowing it up, did it feel surreal too, a little bit?
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Because we really went in a very short time from playing little tiny clubs into a handful of people to, okay, oh gosh, now we're out, opening. The first like kind of big step up was some opening gigs. And early on, we got to do like a week or two opening for the Dave Matthews Band. And so like all of a sudden we're playing in like Hershey Park and like these just huge, football stadiums. And we're just like, whoa, what? And then, we went back to doing some smaller shows. We did some shows opening for the Indigo Girls. We actually did a run opening for John Mayer back, really early on. But then I was like, okay, now we're playing for 1,000 people. Okay, cool. And now we're playing for 5,000 people. It just is surreal. It felt like the most natural thing and also the most surprising thing somehow at the same time.
Had to be a good feeling too, like being there from infancy. It wasn't like, all you just got called after they were on the road and it was huge and you just got hired to play guitar.
No, which is a different feeling. It gives you a sense of pride that you're part of the thing.
Yeah.
That's happening. I'm not the only guitar player on the first record, but I played on most of it. And so to go out and work hard to promote something that you're actually integral to is a really good feeling. That's different than just like learning somebody's parts and trying to cop all these tones. And that's a serious job too. And I know a lot of people who are great at that, but I'm not particularly good at that. So it felt good to me to be playing music that I was part of from early on. And then, so yeah, I got to do 3 records with Nora, and all of the ensuing tours, and then, you know, when I left, it was only because of just stuff that was going on in my. I needed to get off the road for a little bit, so you know, I wouldn't say I'm still a friend of Nora. We don't hang out all the time, but we talk once in a while, and it's totally friendly, and I'm glad to check in with her and see how she's doing, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
I saw her play in LA like 2 or 3 years ago. She came through and played at the Ace Hotel. And it wasn't the first time I had seen her without me being in the band. I'd seen her at festivals and stuff over the years. Like, I'd be playing with somebody and she'd be there. But it was just really nice to, like, I don't know. Have you ever seen somebody play that was like a band that you were part of, and then?
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, it's interesting. I was in Nashville this year in February, right before everything closed. Well, last year in February, before everything closed. I was producing a record, and the band that was there with me to play on this artist album was myself, Calvin Turner, and Lamar Carter, and we all played with Raphael Sadiq for years and years and years.
Oh, yeah.
And then Raphael had just put out a new record and was on his first tour in many years. So obviously none of us were doing it. You know what I mean? We all kind of gone our own ways. And he happened to be in Nashville the night before we started the record, so we were all there. So all three of us stood out front in the audience, seeing him play this new album with a different band, standing at the front of house desk with the engineer who's been there forever. So that was the guy that was front of house guy while we were there. And it was like, wow, you feel a sense of pride, you know, even though Raphael was an artist way before us. I mean, he's incredible, but yeah, it's a cool feeling. I like it.
Yeah.
Wow. So what brought you back to California?
Right. Well, personal stuff more than musical stuff. In 2009, I was widowed. You know, I was married before, and I was widowed, and I started to feel after that a little untethered in New York, and then my dad, my dad who had bought me my bar mitzvah guitar, was sick, and I wanted to get to spend some time with him, you know, while there was time. So when I moved back to California in 2012, I guess, it had zero to do with music. It was just where my head and my heart were at, and I didn't know if I was going to stay for a long time. But I tried it out for a year, and then things started to happen. Because when I first moved back to LA in 2012, I think my head was still thinking about the LA music scene in how, you know, maybe what it was like before that, you know, and so I had to kind of catch up with, you know, where the players were and what was happening. And so it took me a minute to really get in the swing, but I didn't move there at that time for having anything to do with music. But of course, music is what I do, so I have to find a way to do it.
Yeah. Did the move back to LA coincide with like a ramp up in educational stuff for you?
It did. Man, it's funny you asked that. I didn't know that it was going to, but it really did. When I first moved to LA, in 2012, I wasn't doing that much because I didn't know anybody, and I wasn't. So I started doing this YouTube thing, you know, like in 2013, I guess, 13 or 14, called Guitar Tips. And it was just a way. It's funny because, like, this is everyone's life now, like sitting in your room talking into your camera or your phone or whatever. But I was just like, well, I'm not really connecting with a lot of people right now. And actually, I still had a gig in New York that I was flying back to do. So in a way, I didn't, since I wasn't sure how long I was going to stay in LA, and since I still had a good gig in New York, a road gig, I just thought, you know, while I'm here, when I have some downtime, I'll make some videos and I'll start this YouTube channel. And then shortly after that, I got offered the job of being the chair at the guitar department, the chair of the guitar department at LA College of Music, what had been Llama and became LA College of Music. And so, yeah, it did definitely feel like the educational part of my life was ramping up. Like, okay, now I'm a department chair, and I've got this YouTube channel. And so, I think a lot of people in LA maybe thought of me as an educator more at first, more than as a player. And so it was nice as more time went on that I actually got to go out and play more. And there was a part of me that was like, I guess I'll just be an administrator now. Like, that'll be my what I do. But I have to play,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, from the outsider's perspective, my own, I figured, oh, he moved back for that job, like but it was not that case at all.
No, it wasn't the case. But again, it kind of came through. It's funny how so much of my professional life has been a slow burn. I mean, the guy who was the chair at that time was Jody Fisher, who I knew from teaching at the National Guitar Summer Workshop going back to the early 90s. And he used to have me over to LACM or Llama to do guitar master classes when I wasn't living in LA, anytime I'd pass through. And so he really opened the door to make that happen. But when I first moved to LA, he was still doing that gig, and then he left and they were changing things up, and that's when the opportunity happened. But I didn't move to Los Angeles for that gig. That if I was writing it into a movie, your version's better. I moved to LA for that gig, but it was a little messier than that.
Right. Sure. Man, when you look back, on the arcs and the moves, and now you're back in New York,
Yeah.
and the jumping back and forth and all this stuff. I've been thinking some of these thoughts myself too, because of fucking pandemic, and all we can do is be introspective. But
Yeah.
but did it turn out the way? I'm asking you, did it turn out the way you thought it would? Or does it feel like you just went with the flow and did what felt right at the time? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
How much of it was like you setting goals, or was it all? It seems like most of it was driven by your heart.
Yeah, most of it's driven by my heart. That's really true. And I think about it. I'm glad it's not just me being introspective in this funny time. I was really just like thinking about it a lot this morning, writing in my journal about that very question. So I'm going to read to you from my journal. My goal has always just been to be a good player, to be a good musician, to make music that connects. Because like you, when I was a kid, I had a record. Before I had a guitar, I had a record player. And I just, records have always felt, music through records felt magic to me when I was a kid. And when I realized that you could climb inside the machine and like make records, and, that's just always been the thrill for me. But and that's kind of what I was asking you, like what would you tell a student about learning to play in this time when you can't play with anybody? If I had a student, I always tell my students, be goal-oriented. If I had kids, I would tell them, be goal-oriented. But my actual life has been very much, I don't want to just say going with the flow, because that sounds passive, like I'm just like, like a boat in the sea,
Right.
but hopefully that, like what I was saying about Peter Erskine and paying attention, I think if you pay attention and you make decisions based on what's really happening, and what's in your heart, it doesn't have to be linear.
Yeah, you're right. All right, it's a constant reshuffling, reimagining of the things you thought might happen, the desires you wanted to achieve,
Yeah.
realizing some of those were bullshit and you don't need to do them at all. Things
Yep.
that used to be important to you, you realize that, well, geez, why did I ever want that? You know what I mean? And it changes constantly. You just got to be kind of open to realizing it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's just being a human being on the earth,
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Yeah. Like if I look back at 13-year-old me's idea of what my future was going to look like, I almost haven't crossed any of those things off the list besides making a living as a guitar player, you know?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So there you go. Well, it's been a success for you, man. Uh, your path, everybody has their own, but from an outsider's perspective, I love everything you've done, and I'm so inspired by all aspects of your career. The playing, of course, first and foremost, but the education and just you personally, man, you as a person, those things, I take note of those things.
Well, that's very much appreciated, Josh.
Yeah,
Thank you.
man. Well, let's jump into the 10 questions.
Oh, right. Okay.
All right. When you started playing guitar for the first time and picked it up, do you remember the first riff, lick, chord that set the hook? Like you can't believe you just figured this out. Like maybe it's a song and you can't believe you learned the intro or whatever. And then, there's no going back after that moment.
Yeah. Um, uh, I think it would have been, I got the Beatles album Let It Be. And I always liked the later Beatles. Didn't relate to I Want to Hold Your Hand at all, but like Sgt. Pepper and White Album always was cool. What was cool about Let It Be is that it was really raw. Like, so if somebody played something, you was just out there. Like if it was a John guitar part or a George guitar part, it wasn't buried in a. So I think it was like, I hope I can play it now, but it was it's I Dig a Pony.
Yeah.
And when I figured that out, and I was like, oh, man, like I still right now, like there's part of me that feels like I'm that kid again when I play it. Yeah, that was the moment when I could play that.
It's like a magic trick that you figured out, like when you first get something like that. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah, it's exactly like that. It's like figuring out a magic trick.
Yeah, and like my parents loved the Beatles, but obviously as a kid, it wasn't my first thing, wasn't
Yeah.
the Beatles. But the first melody I ever learned that wasn't a scale out of a book was Michelle, though, because somebody gave me it on a piece of like a sheet music piece of the Michelle melody. So I remember like vividly learned that's like the first full melody I ever learned out, A and B section. And yeah, it felt like then I went and I made my dad pull the record out because I'd never even heard it. I just read it, and he put the record on and I played along, and it felt like, well, there's no going back after this.
Yeah.
That feeling is special, Yeah. Yeah. All right. Number 2, along the same lines. Do you
Okay.
remember the first solo that ever just, you had to learn it, note for note, or was that something you didn't do?
That's funny. I wasn't into soloing that much as a kid. I really, in my first rock band, I mostly played rhythm, and occasionally I'd get to play hooks. There was a song called Head First by a band called The Babies, and they had this little guitar hook in it. It was just this. I can't play now. There it is. Apologies to the Babies. So like we played Dancing with Myself, Gen X, Billy Idol, and that had this little. So like I was mostly like rhythm, and then occasionally I get to play hook. But I do remember I learned the guitar solo from Stray Cat Strut.
Yes.
Like I heard that and I was like, okay, I got to figure that out. Probably before that I had learned some Beatles solos, I think I could play the solo from Get Back, and because I just liked it because it was melodic and I could figure it out pretty quickly. But when I remember when I heard Stray Cat Strut, I was just like, what is that?
Yeah.
You know?
I felt the same way when I first heard Stray Cat Strut, even though I wasn't hearing it, I guess, when it was released. But I remember that lick that you just played, and then the ending lick, the and I was like,
Right.
I have to learn that lick. Yeah. Unbelievable. That's a good one. All right, number 3. What's the first thing you play most times you pick up a guitar? Do your hands just have autopilot and go somewhere?
Yeah, I almost always play a G chord and then kind of mess around with that. I don't know why that is. It's funny, I never thought of it, but I told you the story earlier. That was the first thing I learned on the guitar at camp. So maybe it's just like that's the root, you know? Yeah.
It's funny. Mine has shifted from E to G. Mine is always E now as well when I pick up the guitar.
Okay, I don't want to interrupt the flow, but I have to ask you this because a friend of mine recently asked me this, who's an incredible trumpet player in New York. And we were talking about guitar. He was telling me he did this tour with Fred Tackett a while back, and he was telling me some stories about Fred. But he's like, well, I got to ask you a serious question. I'm like, what? He's like, is the guitar in E or is the guitar in G? So what do you think? Do you think the guitar is in E or do you think the guitar is in G?
Well, Jesus. When you sit down and think about it like mathematically like that, you're right. I guess it is in G to me. If you think about it like theoretically, it would be more like in G to me, I guess.
Yeah.
But we all think it's in E. I mean, E is that thing that we play.
Right.
But it's like the same way as a piano, you know. Is a piano really in C? I mean, I guess it is, you know.
Right.
You know. I don't know. We've got 6 pianos. That could be what, you know. That's an interesting question. But yeah, I guess if you did this, I guess it's in G.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good question. I like it. All right. Number 4. This may be the same answer then. What key, style, song, or groove, maybe especially groove, lives in your head when you don't realize it? Like when you're cooking eggs or driving the car and music's not on. Like for me, a lot of the time when I'm not working actively on music, and that's what's stuck in my head, my default setting is a swing or a shuffle. I'm just hearing some and I'm blowing over the top of it normally.
Uh-huh.
I wonder, do you have something that comes and goes like that? It's just kind of always in the back of your mind.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a number of years ago, Alan Toussaint, the pianist, the New Orleans pianist, made a record called The Bright Mississippi. It was produced by Joe Henry. And on that record, he does a version of Just a Closer Walk with Thee, just piano and clarinet, Don Byron on clarinet. And there's something about this, I'll just do it in G since the guitar's in G. You know, and I'm not playing what he's playing, but that kind of feel that's kind of in between. It's like it's not exactly swing, but it's not swing. And the two hands, if only like on the guitar, I could actually have my hands be rhythmically independent in the way that a pianist can do that. That kind of feel. Like that kind of thing, that gets stuck in my head all day. I never want that to stop.
It is. That's such a magical feel. And like just listening to you play it just now, I'm struck by the first thing that sticks out to me in analyzation of it, I guess, is the bass. You know, the way the bass is kind of halftime against, you know, quarter notes. And that's what makes it. I think it is.
Yeah.
It's like half swung, half straight. It's
Yeah,
the
that's right.
two against each other. It is such a great feel. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That's a good answer. All right. Have you, one thing I've been doing during the pandemic as a B side to this question, I've been trying to be conscious of what's the first thing I hear when music comes on. So that was the first thing I heard when you started playing that. But
Use the bass line.
yeah, yeah. Or, what's the first thing I would do? Like sometimes I can't help but listen to something as a session guy and think what would be the part I would add. Most of
Right.
the time it's normally I'm just start blowing over the top of it. I start
Right.
hearing improv. But
Right.
I've been trying to be cognizant of what's my first instinct, You
Huh.
ever do that?
Yeah, sure.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah, I've been trying to key into it. Maybe I can figure out some stuff. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. That's the gig, is to think about those impulses and
All right.
yeah, and to be able to come up with something, something that makes musical sense off the top of your head, without overthinking it.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Number 5. When did you feel like you started to find maybe your voice on the instrument? Was there a moment where, either you played something or someone maybe even brought it to your attention, you played something different and you realized, hey, this feels like my own thing. I'm going to go further this way. You remember like any conscious things like that?
I do. And it was fairly late. It was after I moved to New York. So I'm already in my early 30s at that point. I played a lot of music already, but I felt like I found my voice there early in my New York time, 96, 97, something like that. I was playing with Joey Barron. He's a drummer, and he put together a group called Killer Joey with 2 guitars, me and Steve Cardenas, and Tony Scher on bass. And that was a very sink or swim thing because Steve is such a great guitar player and really a hero to me. And to be in a band with him, I really had to claim whatever was mine because I couldn't be deferential to Steve, even though I really look up to him. I had to, I had to claim whatever the stuff was that was my own, and then amplify it, really, and own it. So I don't know if I could play you a thing that's that thing exactly, but it's. I just remember in that time frame finally feeling like, okay, I figured out what my thing is. And shortly after that, I made my first record as a leader, which is called Buttermilk Channel. And then again, when I was composing, it was my first real record. It was my first record where I wrote all the tunes and put the band together and recorded it. And that maybe is even the real answer to that question. It's like, okay, now I'm in a studio, we're playing my music. I've got a sound, I've got an approach. So that might have even really been when it hit me.
Interesting. Because when I listen to you play, it's normally pretty obvious to me that it's you. You know what I mean? You have it's not just like, it's a couple of factors, without funneling it down and watering it down. But I do hear like, okay, it's like obviously harmonic stuff, the things, the way you hear things. The pace at which you play is always, I love the relaxed nature of the way you play. And then there's always something that surprises me, in there. And so it normally it's like I can pick you out if I hear something. Yeah. I don't know. That's what I see from an outsider's perspective. But it's always interesting to me how people think they arrive at it. A lot of guys, most guys is, well, I don't, I don't have my own voice. And I don't think that's true. Maybe you don't think about it in those terms, but, I can remember a lot of left turns in my upbringing as a player in service of, hey, I'm going to move away from just playing this guy's shit and go this way, Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, we all have to figure that stuff out. But yeah, quite often it's what you subtract, as much as what you add.
100%. 100%. All right. Number 6. What do you consider your biggest weakness on the guitar?
Oh, wow. Um, uh, just um, straight groove playing. Uh, like I mentioned Joey Barron's band. So in that band, half the tunes were these gorgeous jazz ballads that Joey wrote, and the other half he had written these kind of like twisted James Brown kind of things. And it was the first time I'd ever been in a band where it was like, no, just literally just play that thing for 8 minutes.
Yeah.
And, it was like, well, wait, don't you want some like, no, all these pieces fit together. Mm-hmm. The drum part and the bass part and the rhythm guitar part that Joey had put together. I mean, yeah, of course, little tiny decorative stuff could be there. But if you don't play that thing, it doesn't work, really. It's not the thing. And I was just thinking about that recently. It's still, I mean, this is many years later, but that if I had to play that gig now, I think I wouldn't sweat about having to play the jazz ballads at all. But the groove stuff, I would get in the shed and just play simple, harmonically simple, but rhythmically not simple grooves, and just lean into it and just give it up,
Yeah. Interesting. All right.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have picked that as your weakness, but it's interesting. Everybody feels different things. Interesting.
Yeah.
All right. Number 7. Who's a big influence on your guitar playing that people maybe would be surprised to hear?
That's interesting. Uh, hmm. Paul McCartney. I mean, I don't think anybody's going to fall out of their chair for hearing that, but I feel like he doesn't get called out as a guitarist as much. And, in the Beatles, when I was a kid, I just assumed that all the great guitar playing was George Harrison and John Lennon. But, you come to find out later on, like, oh yeah, that solo that I love, that's actually Paul. A lot of my favorite guitar solos on Beatles records are Paul. And, I obviously the solo on Maybe I'm Amazed is incredible. There's a guitar solo on his Ram record from a song called Too Many People that's really great. And Blackbird. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
Blackbird. And so in my head, he's as much of an imprint on what guitar is supposed to sound like as anybody that I would be obvious. You could probably guess that all the other players that have influenced me. But if the question is who might surprise you, I would say it's not surprising, but I just wanted to say it because his name doesn't come up a lot in guitar conversations, but he's huge to me. Huge.
Yeah. You're right. He doesn't come up enough in conversation for his guitar playing. Yeah, you're 100% right. That's a good answer to that question. Number 8. In a gig situation, would you rather be stuck with a great guitar and a shitty amp, or vice versa? Bad guitar, but a great amp.
Oh, this is not hypothetical. I've done both of these.
Absolutely.
I'm gonna think about this. I think I could do more with a great guitar and a shitty amp.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. What's your reasoning? because I'm the opposite. I would go the other way.
Yeah. Um, just because I've really been there, it's very rare that I would be at a gig and not have my own guitar, unless I'm just sitting in or something. Um, so I just don't have as much experience with that, and I do like shitty guitars. I do, but uh, yeah. I've just played so many gigs with crappy amps, either because my amp died or or it's just a backline situation. So I don't know that I only answer that because I've been there. I mean, the one of the last tours I did before all this, I was out on the road with a singer named Liz Wright, and I brought my 335, my 64, not my bar mitzvah guitar, but my 64 335, and I brought a Collings OM. So those are great instruments, no problem. But on the tour rider, the venue always had to provide a Telecaster and an amplifier, because there was a couple songs in the set that were in a different tuning, so it was just easiest to, like, here's a Telecaster, put it in the tuning, leave it there. And the guitars, a Telecaster literally on that same tour ranged from Squier Telecasters to this master built, I can't remember his name, but there's his name is Yuri something, there's a famous. Yeah. So on the same tour, like one night I'm playing a Squier Telecaster. Sometimes it was a Stratocaster. They just didn't provide a Telecaster in that town. They provided a Strat. And then like the next night I'm, from Squier Telly to $10,000 master built on the same tour. And, but the amps were always dodgy because it's supposed to be like, a deluxe reverb or a twin reverb, but even that could be the range. And so I got pretty good at making shitty amps work for me, but I had a hard time with the Squier Telly. Just, it wasn't staying in tune. And so, and anyway, that's just my experience. I don't know why do you say the opposite?
I mean, my experience is the same as yours, as far as I always normally have my guitar. I'm not going somewhere without my guitar.
Right.
But I've played literally thousands of gigs with awful backline amps in my life. I've probably played more gigs with amps that I don't own than amps I do own in my lifetime. I bet. I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case.
I'm sure that's true.
Yeah. And there's just something about, not that I would choose to not have my own guitar, but I feel like I have a better night normally when the amp is good than when it's not. And right. I know that I'll end up being in a better headspace. So I could take any guitar and muscle through it, kind of, as long as the tone is all right and the reverb works and it kind of fits my parameters. As if I have my guitar and my pedal board and the back line is a Marshall from the 2000s with closed back and no reverb, that gig is just going to suck no matter what, even with my guitar, so that's just, I don't know. That's just the way I view it.
I get that.
Yeah. But it's been split pretty much 50-50 between guys. Yeah.
In the studio, I'm a lot happier to try a different guitar. And, a lot of times you're in a studio, and of course a nice studio is going to have some nice guitars, but sometimes there's just a weird guitar in the corner that winds up being the perfect thing. So I do like that. But on stage, I'll stick to my answer.
Gotcha. All right. Number 9. What keeps you motivated and pushing forward, like to better yourself as a musician and a guitar player, to keep working on new stuff, to keep bringing new things to the party, not to just rest on your laurels and stop growing? Because we all know guys who are professionals, but they kind of reach a spot and that's what they sound like. They don't work on new shit. And then we know the other guys who never stop working on new shit. What keeps you working on new shit?
Yeah, that's a good question. Uh, um, well, listening to records and hearing sounds that inspire me to try new things. Even going back to some of my old favorite records and hearing them in a different way, like noticing stuff that I never noticed before. Um, so a lot of what keeps me going is just being inspired by records, which is how I started.
Mhm.
Um, and um, I wanted to keep making the same record over and over again. Like I haven't put out a record in a little while. The last record I put out was 2 years ago. It was a singer-songwriter record. Um, I did that record. I don't want to make that record again.
Yeah.
Uh, and so if I want to not make that record again, I have to either discover something new that I am not already doing, or re just reprioritize what I am doing. Yeah, so I guess it's that. I don't want to make the same record again, and that's I don't know if that's a great answer, but that's what it is. Yeah.
I can relate. I can relate. And I don't want to make the same record ever, you know. And
Right.
sometimes it's to my own detriment because people don't can't put you in a little box, and they start to expect this from you, and you don't give it to them. But I can't help it. You know?
Man, but I mean, is there anybody that you love who just made the same record over and over again?
No, no one at all. No
Yeah,
one at all. No,
exactly.
no, you're right. You're right.
Yeah.
Wow. All right, and number 10, we kind of touched on this in our conversation,
Okay.
but it's about being goal oriented and having a 5-year plan. Do you have some specific goals that you want to achieve in the next 5 years or so? Is there anything you really want to accomplish?
Huh. Yeah. Well, I want to I want to make a solo guitar record and tour in support of that. And I'm still not really sure how that would even go. I've never made an instrumental solo guitar record.
Mhm.
And all of the solo gigs I've ever played have been pretty casual. I've never played like solo guitar at a festival or
Right.
anything like that. But I really want to do it. Of course, right now, who knows? That's everything is so different now. But before the pandemic, that was where my head was at. I started writing solo guitar etudes. I started listening to a lot of solo records, guitar and other instruments, and just trying to think about what, it's a funny thing because right now all I want to do is play with people. After this last year,
Yes.
making a solo record seems like the most narcissistic, stupid thing you could do.
Listen to what I worked on for the last year. Here it is. Yeah. Yeah.
But that's where I was at before this, and it's still, if we're talking about a 5-year goal, that's not my 1-year goal. My 1-year goal is to play with people, but my 5-year goal, I still want to figure out how to make compelling solo music that I'm not sure what it is yet, but I'm that's what I'm working on.
Very cool. Well, I'll be in line to buy it when it comes out.
Okay, cool.
Ruling, man. Well, we reached the end of the 10 questions, so you're safe. No controversial answers. We're all good.
That's
Dude,
good.
this was a joy to talk to you, man. And there will be links to all things Adam Levy in the body of this video. For the rulers, hang on and we'll do the turn 2. If you're not a ruler, you should become a ruler. Be a member of my YouTube channel, or at least please subscribe. Hit the subscribe button. Keep me motivated. I'll continue making videos and content. But Adam, thanks for taking the time out of your day to do this. It's been a pleasure to have this chat with you, man.
Josh, it's been my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Yeah, really, really enjoyed it. And everybody, well, thank you very much. And rulers, we'll be right back.